Hi, this is Scott from the WaterWise Community Center, and in this video we are going to take a look at and show an example of taking an existing irrigation manifold, like what most properties would have set up to water a lawn sprinkler system, and converting one of those valves for use in a drip irrigation situation. While we do that, we're also going to address a number of other common problems that we see in residential irrigation systems associated with the state that the valve is in right now. So in this valve manifold, we are going to be using the center valve for our new drip system, and that is the one on the left in this zoomed in shot. And so this valve manifold was installed before I moved on to this property, and it was installed by a landscaper, but we see a lot of common mistakes. The first mistake, most obvious one, is that the pipe going up to and then again down out of the valve is white PVC pipe. That is absolutely not designed to be in the sun long term. It is not stable and begins to degrade in UV light, and this thing is in the sun every day. So we're going to also, while we are fixing up the valve, we are going to install gray pipe. Gray pipe is the kind of pipe that is treated to be able to be in UV light long term. It's nice that we have this isolation or shut-off ball valve here. That will make our work on the valve a lot easier. However, you can see long-term white pipe. There used to be a small leak here. I can still feel it's a little moist, although there's no detectable leaking water. This is just a problem waiting to happen. We're not going to fix this today, but I'll need to get this within the next year or so. This manifold has been working just fine, but we're going to address a few problems that we know are going to hinder us later on. This wiring is another one of the most common issues that we see. There are wire nuts that are made for outdoor use that have a gel inside, which makes these connections good long term in the outdoors, but oftentimes you see people just use normal indoor wire nuts, maybe put some electrical tape around them, and this just doesn't last, and there starts to get corrosion. One of the most common causes for valves not turning on that we see are corroded wires that have come connected in wire nuts that are not designed for outdoor use. And so what we are going to do is we are going to remove this valve, we're going to fix up our piping, and we are also going to install the pressure regulator and filter assembly that we'll need to run our drip irrigation. It is absolutely essential to have a pressure regulator and filter if you're working with drip irrigation. In most cases, in a large or medium-sized drip zone, this valve would actually be just fine with the addition of a pressure regulator and filter. However, it happens that the zone that I'm going to be running on this valve is just a very narrow area, small, just a few feet wide planter up against the house, had been on sprays, and those sprays, they don't make sprays for a planter that small, so those have been spraying on 60-year-old bricks every time they turned on. So first thing I did when I moved here is I turned this zone off on the timer. I've just been hand watering the plants I replanted into that area ever since, and so ready to get started to do that with drip irrigation. Because it's a very small area, we're actually going to be installing this low flow valve. This is a valve. This one happens to be made by Rainbird that specifically comes in a kit for small areas of drip irrigation. So if you are interested in how to fully design a drip system, check out our full online workshop about transforming turf irrigation systems to set them up for WaterWise landscapes. We'll put the link in the description. But a big part of that design is understanding the total water demand, whether it's per hour or per minute in that system. And valves are rated for a certain range of water demand, certain range of water to go through those valves. For a best practice, if you're using a drip system that's putting less than 5 gallons per minute through this valve in terms of total water demand, sometimes a valve will have problems properly shutting off if the flow is too low. Now the common Rainbird anti-siphon valve, which is this, is rated down to 3 gallons per minute. However, they do recommend as a best practice that if you are 5 or less and you're using drip, that you install this low flow valve. Looks almost the same. You'll see on this side has that little LFV, and so that, you know, is the low flow valve. And so we'll swap that out while we're at it as well. The very first thing that we're going to want to do is to pull back our mulch and then dig some to reveal the pipe that is both feeding the water into the valve, as well as the first couple of feet or so of the pipe that is receiving the water out of the valve. Now you'll notice I have already pulled down our isolation ball valve. This is absolutely essential. If not, when you cut this supply side, there's going to be a huge mess. You're going to have water everywhere. If you don't have the valve at the manifold, this might be a good chance to install one. When I rebuild this, I'll probably have this in a little valve box in the ground. If not, you might have one around the front of your house where the water goes into the house, or maybe splits with the irrigation system. Or if not, you might need to turn your water off temporarily at the meter. Most water agencies do not want the homeowner to actually touch the valve at the meter. Sometimes you need to call your water agency and work with them to get that done. But realize, if we're going to be gluing pipe, that this thing is going to have to remain off for usually overnight. I like to give it 24 hours. You can read the rating on your specific glue that you're using. It doesn't always need to be that long, but if it's going to be on the main line, I like to give it a nice long cure time. And so these isolation valves or ball valves are really, really useful if you ever need to do work on your system, so you don't have to go all the way back and turn off all the water to your house, or even all the water to your irrigation system if you have valves elsewhere on the property. And then another thing that you always want to do, that we did previously as I was setting up for this project, is you want to turn on the valve and you want to absolutely verify that that is the one that's watering the area that you're intending to water. You don't want to do all of this work and realize that you are confused on which valve it is, and you've just done a whole bunch of work on the wrong valve. So we've already done that. And so with that, we will start peeling back the mulch and we will get going exposing our pipe. So if you have a trenching shovel or a narrower shovel, this is a perfect time to use it. If you don't, just a wider spade can work fine. I always end up working with a hand trowel closer to the valve itself. And just to keep things clean, sure you have your wires out of the way. Just to keep things clean, I like to remove all my mulch first. Have a nice thick mulch layer in this area. Put that off to the side so we can keep our mulch and our actual soil separate. We never want to mix them if we can avoid it. And so hopefully that'll be enough room to work with. We'll sort of see as we go. I always like to have a small hand trowel available to do that more detailed work up around the valve. And so from here, we'll dig down to start to expose the pipe that comes from this valve. I always like to have on hand one of these flexible gardening tubs to put my soil into. Keeps things cleaner, keeps the soil out of the mulch if I have a big pile nearby. It makes it really easy just to dump all of that soil directly back into my hole. You want to dig slowly and carefully. You don't want to put your shovel directly through a pipe. And sometimes the pipes don't always go straight out, depending on where they're going to feed. They might go in different angles. You can see here that blue that we're exposing. That's a valve or a zone that I redid using an alternative pipe product called Blue Lock that we talk about in some of our other videos. And so you can start to see that this valve, which does go around to the front yard, kind of goes off in an angle to the right. So we're going to chase it a little bit and going to have to peel back a little more of our mulch to do that. There we go. And also, another reason to be careful while you dig is because sometimes the irrigation wire comes back into the trench in an unpredictable way. So even though it's up here, you can see if we were just slamming the shovel through, we might have ripped our irrigation wire, which would not be good. And from here, start working with our hand trowel to give us some more working space under and around this valve. Sometimes that's just a little bit easier because we have a number of different pipes all close together. It's a lot easier to get in there with the hand trowel. So we are about ready to cut our line, and for this we'll use our PVC cutters. Now, if we were just going to be adding on our filter and pressure reducer to this valve and we don't need to change the valve, then we would make just a couple of cuts. To start, do a cut about right here. And depending on the direction, uphill or downhill, the line goes, you might have some water that drains out. So it's also always good to dig down a little bit underneath the pipe, both for room to work, and so that water won't flood the hole if there's a decent amount of it, and you won't get a bunch of dirt and stuff getting caught up in your line. And with that, we do another cut here, because we're going to want to unscrew the pipe out of this, which should just unscrew. And there we go. So if we were just installing our filter and we weren't worried about changing out the line to be our gray pipe, we can just go from here. Oftentimes, a lot of the local irrigation supply stores will carry this part, which is both the filter, which is needed, and the pressure regulator at the same time. So for our low flow filter, this is the red dot 30 PSI filter. A more common part for larger zones sold by itself would be one that's labeled yellow at 40 PSI. Both will work. The 40 PSI will just give you a little bit more capacity for a larger zone based on some of the engineering of how pressure is lost in pipes over distances. And so it has the filter and pressure regulator in one piece, and they always have the direction of the flow. So if you are keeping this valve, you can just wrap this with your Teflon tape, screw this in. You always will need to, in most cases, take off this part to have the clearance to screw this in, reassemble it, and go from there. But because we are installing our low flow valve, we're going to take it one step further. We're going to remove this, connect in deeper down. And so this would be also an applicable tutorial to how you would swap out a valve if the valve was completely not functioning, not repairable, where you would go from there. So most manufacturers' recent models of valves will work for drip irrigation. They can go relatively low flow as long as it's not a tiny zone. The Rainbirds will do it, the Hunter brand will do it, I think even the Orbits will do it. But if you have a really old valve, or if you have the old style brass sprinkler valves, this will be a good time while you're setting up your new drip irrigation zone to take on that valve as well. And so for this side of things, we don't need to go all the way to the base, and in fact, we don't want to go all the way down to the base. We need some room to glue, some room to work. What we just basically want to do is make sure that this white PVC is going to absolutely stay underneath ideally the soil surface, definitely the mulch surface. We want to make sure that it doesn't get any access to the sun. So we'll clean some things off a little bit, and we'll give ourselves a few inches to glue our coupling onto. and then we'll cut. Cut as straight as you can across, and then this is going to be wired in. Probably been a little bit smarter to do this first, and so you want to unwire this, and each valve is going to be wired in 2 places. One of the wires will go to the actual wire that sends the charge to open it. Oftentimes those wires will come to the valve manifold in what's called multi-strand wire. It's going to be one wire, or one set of wires wrapped in a continuous black outer wrapping, and then there's different colors inside, and each color will go to the hot part, the part that sends the charge to a valve. So you can take this off. You saw how easy this came off, was not on very well. So we'll take that off. And then additionally, the other one, and on valves it can be either one. It doesn't matter as long as they go, one goes to one goes to the other. They'll go to the common. Most often that's going to be the white, and it should be set up to be the white wire, and that's the single common wire that the other wire from each valve goes to. They all can come together, and then in the irrigation controller, that goes to the common side. See if I can just wiggle this one out. Again, because it's not put together very well, I'll just need to check, and I'll probably redo this wire as well. I won't do all of them in the demo, but the common one's a very important one. If that comes out, all of them might stop working. So from here, we want to make sure that this is dry and clean. We always want to be gluing on clean pipe, so it's pretty dirty. I'm going to go get a rag and we'll clean that off and dry it out. Before I do that, I'm just gonna stick my finger down in here some, just to squirt out some of that water, to make sure water isn't resting at the very top here. And so that'll allow me to dry the surface. And so we're gonna clean this off just a little bit. And I like to use usually just a single rag, one corner of it being wet will work just fine. You only need to really get it clean, just a couple inches down. And then I'll use the dry part to make sure it's dry. You could do this with paper towels, but I often find that you can use one rag or a whole pile of paper towels. Make sure you don't get any of that junk in there. You don't want that clogging up your valve. So we're looking pretty good, pretty dry. And so the next thing we're going to do is set up our connection to our valve on the supply side. Now we are ready to set up our replacement irrigation valve, and I always like to do as much work as I can outside of the hole, away from the dirt as possible, and then glue in a partially put together assembly a little bit later on after it's prepared. If you're working in the dirt, it can be helpful to have a little base to work on. So here I just grabbed the top of a storage tub and we will go from here. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our supply pipe, what's going to be coming from the main side of the line, always pressurizing this valve, and then on this side, it's going to be the side that lets the water through when the valve is open. Typically what you will see for an installation is an adapter going into the thread here, and then glued to a pipe, and then on from there. But these are really, really important connections, and there's a way to skip having that extra glue joint, just make things a little bit cleaner. It also gives you easy access to the proper gray pipe that's meant to be exposed to the sun, where sometimes that 3/4 inch, which is what we need for our 3/4 inch valve, gray pipe, can be a little bit difficult to source. Not everyone always has it in stock. And so you can use a riser, sometimes called a nipple. You can get these anywhere, big box store or irrigation specialty supply store, and you can get them in different lengths, and they will always come with the threads on both sides. And so here we don't need an adapter now with our thread. We can just thread this right into our valve body, and then on the bottom side we can just cut this and glue this into our coupler where we made our cut before. And so for this one, we are going to use this full 2-foot length. We're going to want to put this one a little bit higher than the other ones were installed, and we'll talk about that why a little bit later. So the first thing we need to do is get our 3 wraps of Teflon tape in the direction of the threads going. 1, 2, 3. Smooth that out a little bit, and then we will carefully thread this into the valve body, starting very slowly, making sure everything is nice and lined up. And we really do want to make sure we hand tighten this one as well as possible. The valves are manufactured really well. If you get a good quality valve, the threads are cut perfectly, so this should be able to thread all the way into the body. So you just have a little extra tape here. Sometimes with pipe threaded connections, it's always good to get them to thread them in all the way. Sometimes they don't go all the way, but in your valve, you should get the thread to go in all the way, if at all possible. So we're going to have this, and then down at the other end, we're just going to carefully line up. You never want to do a cut into pipe at the very end. It's going to be hard to get a nice clean pipe, so we'll go up enough just so that our cutter can have a nice good grip on this, and then we will carefully make our cut. There we go, looking pretty good. And so this is our supply side. Now on our side after the valve, first thing that we are going to need to do is we are going to need to connect our pressure reducer and filter. So this is our pressure reducer and filter, came with the valve. Could have gone on earlier, and then you could have twisted it on with the whole assembly, but because we already put this back part on, we'll take that out, give us the clearance to twist that around. And again, always verify the direction of the flow. So here we have our flow arrow that the water is going this way, so we know that this is the side that we need to attach it on. And while I'm at it, I'll also tape this side, because once I get this on, it's going to be more awkward to tape. Might as well do it now while it will be easier. There we go. Now we will carefully make sure that this is aligned. Screw this in. You always want to make sure on this assembly that you're lining it up so that your last turn is going to be facing out away, because that will mean it's going to be facing away from the other valves, and it will be the position where you can flush things. So if there's 1 or 2 threads left because it's feeling tight and you know it's lined up in the right direction on this side, that's just fine. You don't want to tighten it all the way, find out that it's off at a strange angle, and if that is the case, you'll have to pull out the whole thing. You'll have to take off all the Teflon tape, which is not the end of the world. It happens, but you'll have to do a good job cleaning that out. Sometimes you need to kind of get in there with a little knife, peel that out, and then retape and reapply. So here we are. And so then the next thing we're going to need is our coupler, threaded to threaded, to connect these two. and then we will get ready to cut this last pipe and get ready to reconnect things. And so here we are, our next part, our coupler, and again, gray, meant to be in the sun. This is something that you can't always find at the big box store. The irrigation specialty stores will always have this in gray, and this will just give you something that's going to last much longer than the white PVC plastic. And after you get here on this side, where you're not on the constantly pressurized supply side, if things don't want to tighten in all the way, there's still a few threads. Not a big deal at all. Sometimes you can't get things all the way in. You never want to really force and over tighten on the supply side, but I really try to ensure that things do go in if at all possible. On the other side, you're never holding as much pressure in the system because when this is going, the sprinklers are always running, and so you usually can, not going to say be less careful, but you have a little bit more leeway. And you're always going to check for leaks anyways. And with threaded fittings, worst case scenario, you can cut a pipe, retighten, and glue things back together. But we prefer to avoid that. Here we go. Ready to go in here. And you will notice that this side is longer than this side because they were the same size pipe, but we added the pressure reducer and filter assembly. However, when we get to installing our valve, the pipe where this side needs to connect is not always in the same position, so I will leave a little bit of extra space until I know exactly what I'm working with. And so now we're ready to get this side ready for the valve to be glued in. And so we're going to go back to where our cut was because it's been a little while. It's still nice and clean, but take a look inside the pipe. Sometimes a little bit more water will have filled up. Right now we have water just around the edge, and we need things to be nice and dry for us to glue. So just kind of get that water out and then dry off our pipe. And now we're ready to glue our 3/4 inch slip fitting. So slip is where it's just pipe. There's no thread involved and it's a glued fitting. And you can glue together the gray pipe and the white pipe. That's not a problem at all. You don't need an adapter, and because this area is not going to be out in the sun, I'm just fine to use my normal Schedule 40 pipe. Check our other videos for tips about proper gluing precautions. We have a great video with our conservation specialist Brandon talking about proper glue technique. One of the parts of that is wearing gloves, either thin latex or nitrile gloves. I happen to be a fan of the black nitrile gloves for doing gluing work because latex ones tend to fall apart pretty quickly when you are doing stuff out in the field, and the black ones really do last well for quite a while and are going to be reusable in most situations. So you'll be able to use them for a project, and then as long as there's no wet glue on them, put them back with your irrigation stuff and get a number of uses out of them. Or if you're doing a big job, they'll last all day instead of the blue latex ones, which will repeatedly fall apart throughout the day. So we've got our gloves on and we're ready to go. And so with gluing, we're always working with primer and we're working with glue. Primer is the one that's much thinner. Primer always goes first. And you're going to want to prime the entire area that's going to come in contact with the pipe. And got ahead of myself here thinking about the video. Normally what you'll do is you'll start on primer with the female part, go around for about 10 seconds or so. You want to let the chemical start to work and set up, because this is a chemical weld that you're setting up. Then you'll go to the pipe, same thing. And on the back side, you really want to make sure that you're getting things well. And then back to the original. Give that just a moment to set up. Now we're going to open up our glue. Sometimes these will get a bit stuck. Definitely want to make sure before you start gluing that you have opened everything and you're not struggling trying to find a wrench or something to get this open when you're getting going. So with primer, you don't really need to worry about using too much, but glue has more of a body to it, and you want to make sure that you don't get a big old glob of glue stuck in the middle of your joint. And so kind of get that with experience, but just make sure that you don't have a huge globbing amount off if you're just doing a 3/4 inch. And then you'll do the same thing here. You'll start with the pipe, go to the coupler, and then back to the pipe, making sure everything is evenly distributed. And then push on and give it about a 1/4 turn. That kind of makes sure that the glue is nice and even, good contact. And then you're going to hold it down for about 30 seconds or so, because initially as it starts to set up, there's a little bit of a pushing effect sometimes, pushing back out on the coupling or the fitting that you're putting in, and you want to hold things nice and tight. Make sure it's fully seated. There we go. Taking a look inside, making sure things are nice and even. And then we are ready to line up our valve. And so you can see we're going to have to cut a bit off of here, but we want it to be roughly in the same line as this pipe that is going to connect to. So, see here, to have that, we're going to be just a little bit above that for a fitting that's going to end here. So, we're going to need to cut off. I'm going to start with cutting off that much. You can measure it if you really want to. I tend to eyeball it and just go a little bit at a time to get things as close as possible. So that's looking pretty good. That's going to get us pretty close once we put our fitting on. So we'll go ahead and set up to glue this in. So we're going to set up our primer. Working in our fitting. On our pipe. Always make sure that you are gluing the right side of the pipe. Double check. Make sure that you are working on your supply side. You don't want to glue the wrong side in to the pipe. A little bit more back. Give that just a minute to set up. Got our glue ready. Just the right amount, not too much. And a nice glue joint. I always like to start just a little bit back, so then if it spreads out, you can gently spread it to the front. You don't want to get too much glue on the front and then have it want to clog up the opening. Into the fitting. The final spread here. It's pretty hot. You can feel it starting to set, so I'm just going to get going. And I always want to try to get as close to our quarter turn as we can. Get things pulled forward, set in, and then hold it there. If you're really trying to do a clean job, you can come with a paper towel and kind of wipe things off, but I don't mind a little bit of extra glue on the outside. I'm not entering in any pipe fitting beauty contests. As long as you have enough glue and not so much that you're clogging up the works on the inside. And so while we're waiting for this to set, I'll mention that we set this just a little higher above the other ones. You often see these anti-siphon valves set really low, just a little bit above the ground. But for them to actually work properly, the reason why we use anti-siphon valves is because they are set up so after your sprinkler stops running, there's no way to get back suction onto that pipe system where it's going to suck water that might be in your landscape pipes or in your, if you're using a drip system in contact with your soil, and suck it all the way back into your domestic plumbing where it might go into your drinking water supply. What this does is anti-siphon. It will stop that water from siphoning back by having a breaker effect, and if that's the case, you might see a little water come out the side of this part when the system turns off. But that only effectively works if this valve is at least a foot above the highest water level in your yard, and so we want to get these things elevated nice as well. And then if you aren't able to get it over a foot up, you can work with a check valve, and that can provide some amount of resistance to that check valve. Physically won't let water go backwards into your line. So we should be good from here. And now we have to reconnect these two pieces of pipe. And that doesn't give us a whole lot of room to work with, so probably what we're gonna have to do is chase this a little bit farther back and give ourselves a little more room to work with. Something that we are going to use is on this side of the line, you might consider using an alternative to gluing PVC. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's probably what I would do as a default, but I did just want to show this as an option. This is a product called PVC Lock. We mention it in some of our other videos. Instead of relying on glue for a wider watertight seal, it actually relies on a little rubber gasket and some metal teeth in there. And so if gluing is a little bit intimidating to you, if you're doing this as a first time, now technically these things are rated to take mainline pressure as well. I personally just feel more at home with a glued joint, a chemical weld on the mainline side. But on this side of the valve, I'm perfectly happy with these. I've had installations using this same technology on a other product that this company makes called Blue Lock for years and years with no problems at all. And even the big kind of municipal sized lines, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch lines are more often than not use a gasketed seal. So it's tried and true technology now available on a small scale. And so with that, you really can just slide your piece in and push it on, and you'll feel it kind of bottom out and set. And so we have a pretty good alignment here. Our pipe has a little bit of flex on it, but now we need to connect together, and this is not really enough room to work with a coupler and another piece of pipe that well. So I'm going to cut just a little bit more off of this and give us a little bit more room to work with. And this line is a little bit dirty, so we'll grab our rag, see if it's still wet at all. And I can take off my gloves since we're done gluing now using this PVC lock. See, a little moist still. And it won't get perfectly brand new clean. This thing has been sitting in the dirt for quite a while, but that's quite a bit better. The pipe feels smooth, it's just a little bit stained. For our next piece, we're going to have to connect two pieces of PVC pipe here. So we're going to need a coupler. so we'll use a PVC Lock coupler. This happens to be just an older model. Currently, you get them in their green. This one happens to be blue. No big difference. Make sure if you're buying these though, you check the size, because they make them for 1 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1/2 inch pipe, just like all fittings. And sometimes at the store, they're a little bit mixed up in terms of what's in what bin. So you always check the side, and if you're not used to really eyeballing it, make sure it says 3/4. So now we just need to have a piece of pipe that fits into both of these. So I always keep a supply on hand of just offcuts from other projects, because if you're working on a project with PVC pipe, you'll end up with a lot of pieces like this. Eventually you'll need them. You don't want to have to go to the store just to buy something like this that you threw out already. So, important thing to remember when you're doing this is that these things are going to go, and you can feel inside for where the ridge is that's going to stop them, but about 1 inch on each side. So you don't want to just measure this gap and cut it, because you won't have enough pipe to secure inside the fittings. But certainly we need to cut decent amount of it off just to fit it down in here. Sometimes if there's room for my first cut, I'll leave things a little bit generous, and then I could kind of really level it out and do an accurate second cut. And so definitely don't want any more than that. So we'll do something around that, but my leftover piece, it's not that clean on that side. So I'm gonna take some off first, since we have plenty of pipe to work with. And then this will be the part that goes into this side. And I have to cut something like that, minimally. I'm sure we'll have to cut a little bit more. With that, see if I can fit this in. And cut a little bit more off. But notice that these do have a little bit of flex. You never really want to force them, and then the farther back you dig on the line, the more flex it'll have. So you never want to force them, but you need to assess how much flex you have, and then if you needed more flex, you can even have cut this farther back. Assess the room you're going to need to work with. So that should be enough. We'll send this in here first. Get a nice seat, and then here, I'm going to kind of want to line this up. I can feel in here, and it's going to be something like here to where I can get this fully seated. And this does give me some flex, so I will have some room to pull it back and push it forward. If you just don't have that room working on a pipe, there is a product called a slip fix that you can get, either in glued PVC or this PVC Lock, that will give you basically a telescoping gasketed fitting that lets you almost expand your piece of pipe and your coupling in a small space. This seems like this will work quite nicely. There we go. We'll pull it forward, and here we are set up. And so what we're going to do from here is we are not going to bury our hole yet. We did have the glued fitting on this side, and because of that, we are going to let things dry for 24 hours, maybe a little bit less, but we'll definitely let it dry, cure overnight, and then tomorrow morning we will turn on the water, check everything for leaks. But in the meantime, we can get the valve rewired and be ready to go as soon as that glue fitting has cured. So here we are at our controller wires. It's a low voltage signal that tells our valve to open, and then when it turns off, closes. And so we already saw this not quite ideal wiring situation going on. And we have, from our multi-strand wire going all the way back to our controller, we have our green wire. And then going into our common, we are going to have our other two valves and our white wire. And so we are going to fix both of these, and then eventually I'll have to come and fix the other ones as well. Now your valve's going to have two wires on it, and it doesn't matter which one goes to the hot wire and which one goes to the common wire, as long as each of them goes to a proper opposite wire. And then the big difference, very easy thing that a lot of people do wrong, that I encourage you to do right, is either from the irrigation supply store or the electrical aisle at any hardware store, you want to get wire nuts that are made for the outdoors. So instead of this kind of wire nut, like we're going to be replacing where our commons come together, which is just open and which is just open and meant for indoor wiring, and then some people cover with tape that doesn't last. The proper outdoor wire nuts are closed on the base, and you can push the wires into them, and there's a gel inside that protects them from corrosion. So that's what we are going to use. Installation is exactly the same. So on our new wire, we can start with grabbing one for the common, kind of wrap everything together just a little bit, and we'll use a larger one because we have multiple. Insert them as far as you can, then twist. A little of that gel might come out, and back off on this. And you'll feel things start to tighten up. Not quite there yet. It can be a little awkward when you're working in a tight situation. And you want to make sure that all of this is clear so you can get to the other parts of your valve as well. And we'll see, did not catch anything else in there. And then when you're just one-to-one connection, you can use your smaller outdoor wire nut. These are going to come as threaded multi-strand wire. Just make sure that they're all together. There's not frayed edges. Put these together and insert fully, and then spin them until you feel those start to tighten down as well. So there we go. That's all you need to do to fix up the wiring. Very simple. Now we are set up for long-term outdoor wire health, and we can wait, and tomorrow morning we will turn the thing on and run it and make sure that there are no leaks. Now that we've let our glue dry on our whole assembly overnight, we are ready to turn our ball valve back on to repressurize the system. Should always be done very slowly, and you could hear it pressurize back up, but the valve is doing its job, so no water is coming through. And so at this point, what you want to do is take a look at all of your joints, both our glue joints that we've made down here, as well as our threaded joint up here, and really make sure that there's no water at all, not even any small leaks or one drop at a time coming through. It's something that normally I'd let go for a number of minutes before I would even consider backfilling the hole. This is looking really good, and I will shorten that time for the sake of the video. And then also what we'll want to do is briefly turn the valve on and make sure that there's no leaks on the other side of the valve as well. Best done from your irrigation controller, but in a pinch, or if your controller is not fully set up yet, you can also, in most valve designs, give the solenoid a quarter turn. These Rainbird valves come with a little handle for that. Slowly, till you hear the valve turn on. So now we can see it's running, but no leaks anywhere here. So we'll turn that off. Everything's slow as well. You can hear that valve click off. And then we are ready to backfill our hole. And so with the convenience of having this in the tub, Makes it very easy. Can pull down our irrigation wire, make sure we have some good cover over that. Just a little bit of mulch right here, since we don't have a lot of plants nearby. It's not that critical if there's a little bit of mulch in the hole. Any little trash that's around. And to make sure you have a nice compact backfill, usually I'll backfill part way. I will slightly compact, use my boot a little bit, just kind of gently step things down. And it's not a bad idea to make sure that things have settled around the pipes to use the back of a shovel to gently tamp things down so you don't get soil settling later, like the first time it rains, for example. Should be good. And we will continue. And then we'll just replace our mulch and the job is done. We hope you found this tutorial useful. Please check out all of our other tutorials and online workshop recordings on our YouTube channel. And to stay up to date with everything going on at the Waterwise Community Center and online, sign up for our newsletter at the link on the screen. We hope to see you at the Waterwise Community Center.